He was extremely good looking, but not to me, because I saw what he was under the skin. People related to a psychopath, what is your creepiest moment? My nephew, through marriage, is a crazy little shit. Once, the entire family was playing hide and seek. He was around 9. He didn't like where I hid, so he flew into a rage. He tried to hit me. I grabbed his wrist and twisted just enough to subdue him. He screamed like a freaking maniac. I released him. He then ran into another room stating he needed his Nerf gun to shoot me because he shoots people whenever he's mad. I looked at my sister-in-law and said, seriously, you're okay with this? Her response was that his rage was my fault, I had no right to touch him, and that I should have just let him hit me since he's only a boy. I told her, quite firmly, that if her crazy little bastard ever even gave the appearance of causing harm to one of my children, that I would put him down like a rabid dog. Fortunately, I guess, her husband, my wife's parents and everyone else present told her that she was wrong, her kid was nuts, and that this was a serious red flag. Flash forward 2 years. Kid is still crazy, but that's everyone else's problem because he's still just a boy. I'm staying at their house. Things have mostly settled from that prior incident. I wake up very early every morning. So around 4:30, I find myself awake. I don't want to get up and wake up everyone else, so I just sort of lie there and meditate. At around 5:20, the door opens. Thinking it's my kids, who were young at the time and still came to get us early, I kind of just glance up. Then I notice that it's the nephew and he's holding what appears to be an AR-15. Now, I suffer from PTSD from Iraq. So my fight or flight response is triggered, my heart is pounding, and I'm basically in survival mode. I wait. I watch. He creeps past the foot of the bed, walks up to my side and raises this rifle up to point the muzzle at my face. So I figure, this is it. I'm going to die. Today it ends. The only goal I have for myself right now is to prevent him from harming my wife and kids. He raises it up and the muzzle is a few inches from my face. I reached up, I grabbed the muzzle and I pushed as hard as I could, sending the butt into the little psycho's face. His nose is bleeding, he's crying. He's screaming about how he's going to kill me, how I'm dead, etc. So now everyone is awake. Lights are flipped on and I see that it's a toy rifle made to look like an AR-15. Apparently, this little psycho was planning to stick the muzzle in my face and pull the trigger to scare the crap out of me with flashing lights and electronic gun sounds. I feel somewhat torn. On the one hand, I just broke an 11-year-old's nose for playing with a toy gun. On the other hand, the kid had all of these tells that he was dangerous and what he was doing was super creepy and yet another red flag. My sister-in-law was pissed. Her chosen narrative is that I'm a mentally unstable lunatic who is a danger to all children. She calls the cops. She insists, despite the protestations of my wife, that she's having me arrested and charged with child abuse for hitting a boy for playing with his toys. Police arrive. Interviews take basically the whole day. I'm a little worried that, getting arrested aside, I might not be able to leave this place and go home the next day as planned because these cops might not be done with their investigation. Fortunately, it didn't play out that way. See, this little we need to talk about Kevin Butthole wasn't just a crazy shit around me like in the movies. He was a crazy little shit everywhere and had been for years. The police had a file on him because the school was required to call the police every time he threatened a school shooting, which was often. I laid out my version of events much like I did here. I didn't see him and have a flashback thinking he was an insurgent. I saw him, I knew what he is going through his head, and I wanted to try to prevent him from killing my family. They did let me go home on schedule. And a week later the detective called me to let me know there would be no charges. He also told me that his interview with my nephew was chilling and he hopes that my sister-in-law pulls her head out of the sand and gets the kids some help. I told him she won't ever. And when he's 30 years old and on trial she'll be crying and saying he's just a boy. Hopefully he doesn't hurt anyone, but I know the odds are stacked against that hope. Before anyone asks, I refuse to stay at their house. If we are in town, we stay in our hotel. He is never allowed to be alone with either of my kids. And he is also not allowed in my house since he was caught trying to steal a pocket knife which he said he needed for surgery on the family cat. He was almost 12 at the time. I once woke up to my little sister trying to smother me, but thankfully she was also too small to get the job done. We were 7 and 5. It was the first of 3 attempts she made on my life growing up. She did it because I had refused to sleep on her bed as a sacrifice to the boogeyman. Longer story, we had our own rooms, but I hadn't been allowed to sleep in mine for 2 years. She'd have a fit every time I tried to sleep in my own bed, and our parents would convince me to stay in her room just to get everyone to bed. They went so far as to install a bunk bed in her room, but she still insisted we share just one bed. One night, I woke up to her wetting the bed. I was angry because I didn't even want to be there in the first place, and now I was covered in pee. She screamed at me to get back in bed, and when I didn't, she got up and tried to attack me, smearing yet more pee all over me. So we were both shrieking at this point, and our parents woke up and came down. I don't remember the exact conversation since it's been almost 30 years, but the gist of it was that first she demanded I sleep in the piss puddle and she would just sleep against the wall and we'd pretend nothing had happened, and when my parents didn't agree, she became very distressed and admitted that she thought there was a monster in the closet, and had been insisting I sleep in the same bed with her so it wouldn't kill her. And she was terrified that if I moved back to my room, or even to a different mattress, she'd be eaten. Remember, she's only 5, my parents pulled the mattress off the top bunk and dragged the P1 outside and convinced me to be a good big sister and defend her from the monster. Reluctantly, I let myself be shuffled back into bed with her. I don't remember if it was that night or the next night, but as soon as we were alone, she whispered to me that she makes me sleep on the same mattress with her because someday the monster will come out to eat one of us, and she's going to escape while it's eating me. Without a word, I got up and moved to my room. I was willing to be there to defend her from her monster, but not to be a distraction for it. When our parents came down to investigate the screaming, I refused to move back to her room, and they finally relented. Later that night, I woke up because I couldn't breathe. My sister was on my bed trying to suffocate me with this blank, dead expression on her face. When our parents came back to investigate yet more yelling, she told them she'd just come into my room because she was scared of the monster. They didn't believe me that she was trying to smother me. I started sleeping with my door locked. I didn't think my sister would murder me, per se, because she enjoyed abusing me too much to straight up kill me. One of the biggest things that sticks out from my childhood growing up with her abuse was occasionally if I was sitting on the couch, back of couch facing kitchen, she'd come up behind me and run a butcher knife along my shoulders and neck until I turned around and realized she had a knife. I think she just enjoyed the fear in me realizing what was going on, that look of oh my god, that was a knife? Why the hell do you have a knife? My sister did stuff like this my whole childhood, and even after she was 19 and I was 17 she'd do crazy stuff like throwing a knife across the living room at me if she was mad enough at me. I cut contact with her as soon as I was able to leave at 18. My mom was 19 when I was born and we had a very close relationship when I was little. She was always more of a friend than a mom, and that's just how our relationship was. Before my stepdad, I was always sarcastic all the time, and we joked around a lot. One morning my mom asked me to take the pizza boxes from last night's dinner out to the garage where we put the cardboard recycling. I jokingly told her no as I gathered up the boxes to take them out. I took them out, put them on top of the stack of other cardboard, and turned around to go back into the house and I bumped into my stepdad who had come in behind me without me noticing. He then proceeded to lift my 13-year-old body completely off of the ground by my throat, and pinned me against the wall of the house. He got in my face and was screaming at me about disrespect. I remember flecks of spit getting on my face. My feet were back on the ground but I was still pinned and his hands were around my throat. I was able to get one of his hands in my mouth and I was biting and scratching him. I don't remember what happened next. I don't remember how I got to school. The next thing I remember is sobbing in a private ensemble room in the band hall. My mom still doesn't believe me. Over the next 2 years he continuously got worse and permanently destroyed my relationship with my mother. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow when he was home. I started running away and doing drugs. Eventually my behavior became bad enough that my mom sent me to live with my biological father. Life is better now. I am safe. I still have the occasional nightmare and cannot stand any sort of confrontation whatsoever, but I'll be okay. I have a male cousin who I strongly suspect is some kind of sociopath. When I was a child, I'm female by the way, I lived next door. He was in high school and I was in grade school. His family had a pool and we would often go over and hang out, which I dreaded because this cousin would, when no one was looking, sneak up on me and either throw me into the water or get in with me if I were already in and hold me under until I was so out of breath I would actually breathe in water and go limp. He would pull me up with me coughing and choking or I would claw desperately gasping for breath. He was laughing all the way. It was horrendous and it was creepy how jovial his expression was. He did this all the time and his parents or one of mine, usually my grandmother, would either mildly admonish him if caught or he would do it when no one was around. For some reason I was afraid to tell the extent of his abuses. There were smaller things, little acts of harassment like scaring me, taking my stuff, pulling my hair, taunting me, but the near drownings were the worst. This all went down at the ages of me being 5 to 9 and him 14 to 18. He also picked me up and literally held me, feet first, over the railing of the Royal Gorge Bridge on a family vacation. I think I went into shock and I just recall becoming very still. For that he did get in trouble at least. He apologized because he was forced, but his eyes were always kind of dead but with a sparkle if he were doing something egregious. Like a happy kind of twinkle. Oh yeah, once he had his brother hold me down while he poured tequila down my throat. He did get caught for that because I had to go to the ER. As a kid he was always running away and once killed a stray cat by choking it with barbed wire. He had on some kind of leather gloves. Weird thing is that all the neighborhood boys thought it was cool rather than call out as crazy. When he turned 16 and drove he would purposefully run over stray animals and laugh and brag about it. No one did anything. Enablers for sure. Talk about normalizing or minimizing bizarre behavior. He was extremely good looking like model material, but not to me. Because I saw what he was under the skin. The high school quarterback, adored by all. Girls fought over him. He played football on a scholarship at a Division I SEC school, but suffered a knee injury that ended his career. In high school and college he was always getting in trouble, frequent fights and DUIs, but he got bailed out every time and again, probably due to his athletic ability. It was swept under the rug. He also bragged he had his girlfriends do his schoolwork. He has been married 3 times and has stuck with his third wife who is a martyr type. Scary thing is he is now a high school football coach and has been for decades and was just promoted to assistant principal. Scary, because I think he has no business working with minors. My mom, brother, and I came home to find all of my mother's diplomas and certificates had been gathered into a pile on the floor of our shared bedroom and burned. My mom is blind and had not been given much schooling as a child, so she worked her butt off once we were in school to get an education. Unfortunately, at this time we were forced to live with my grandmother and 2 mentally ill uncles. One of the uncles had a grow room, and the other didn't approve of pot, so he destroyed the room and blamed my mother. Dealer uncle became enraged and decided to burn my mom's certificates because you destroyed something I love, so I destroyed something you love. Your kids are next. This was a week after he shot my brother's cat because he was angry she had kittens in his boat. I've blocked out the next couple of weeks because apparently they were pretty bad, but I'm told that we had to disappear that night with only what we could carry in garbage bags. Not a family member but my mother dated a crazy person after her divorce. We moved into an apartment and he moved in with us not long after. He had long hair and blue eyes and a beard and was the spitting image of white Jesus. And he took it to heart after a few people told him about the resemblance. He pulled me aside one day and told me that he had a secret and he wanted to tell me but I couldn't tell anyone else because the government was looking for him. He confided in me that he was in fact Jesus Christ and that he escaped from a government facility after being captured in 1964. He said he escaped with the help of the Pope during his visit to the USA. The Pope's private security force broke him out and once he was free the Pope advised him to blend in with regular people. He said the Pope told him to not draw any attention to himself. So no miracles, and tell no one. But he trusted me with this information. Jesus Christ was a roofer, in case you were curious. He constantly carried around his roofing hammer and one day it went missing. Jesus lost his mind. He locked my mother, my girlfriend, and myself in our apartment until it was found. This lasted 3 days. I was 18 at the time and was much larger than him and would have had no problem physically removing Jesus from our apartment but my mother insisted he was having a mental episode and if I hurt him or did anything it may mess him up even worse. Turns out he left the hammer, which is really pretty much a hatchet, at a job site and a coworker drove over to return it. I sat there like an idiot and watched this guy hand axe to this lunatic and did nothing. Big mistake. Our 3-day-long lockdown turned into 5 days. The final 2 days was this illiterate nutcase attempting to read aloud from the Bible getting maybe 1 in 5 words right. Remember in school when the teacher would have people read aloud and go around the room and there was always a dude you knew couldn't read, and his part would last 10 times longer than everyone else's part? Imagine that for 48 hours. Jesus would only let us eat bread and water. And the bread ran out quickly. There was a lake outside our apartment and on the 5th day Jesus was looking through the blinds at the lake and called me over to him. He confided in me again. He said you know I can walk right across that lake and right up into heaven. I replied. If you do that I'll follow you anywhere. Go for it man, I would love to see you do that. My plan was to get him out of the apartment and lock the door so my mom and girlfriend would be safe. And pray to this guy's dad that I can run faster than him and make it to a payphone to call 911. He looked at me with his crazy eyes and said, "You trying to get me caught?" I said, "No miracles." He raised up his roofing hammer and told me the only way I was following him anywhere was in the afterlife. It was at that point I thought, I'm going to die, and then he is going to kill my mother and girlfriend. I came to the sudden realization that I no longer cared if Jesus's mental breakdown would be affected by me beating the crap out of him or not. That was no longer my problem. Mid-rant about some religious stuff about 2 inches from my face, I swung as hard as I could and punched him right in the sternum. He still had the hatchet cocked over his shoulder, like someone throwing a football, so the blow caused him to lose his balance and fall over a dining room chair. He crumpled in a heap and my mother, ever the cool head, screamed at me for hitting him. I had knocked the wind out of him and he was gasping for air. My mother assumed he was dying. I would learn later in adulthood my mother was not the brightest light bulb. My girlfriend booked out the door with me close behind after grabbing my mother's arm and dragging her out of the door. I called the police and they came and got him. Last I heard he was in a hospital after he locked himself in a bedroom still saying he was Jesus. He was committed after he used a metal throwing dart to pick veins out of his arm. Never did get to see him walk across that lake though. Listening to my dad trying to persuade my mom they should kill me. I was about 8 maybe. I was a difficult child and my dad often couldn't cope. I remember sitting on the stairs while they were in the lounge listening to their argument. Eventually he persuaded my mom, and I heard them moving so I ran upstairs to hide. My dad came up and dragged me into the lounge. He was holding me down on the floor shouting to my mom, "Do you want me to do it? I'll do it if you wanted me to." She was crying and couldn't decide. Eventually she said no and he let me go and I ran back upstairs. I think they planned to kill me a few times but that was the scariest one. Another time my dad asked me to give him a hand getting something out of the shed. When my back was turned, he hit me in the back of the head with a hammer. I turned around and he was staring at me. His eyes looked like they were going to pop out. I ran past him to go to my mom who was making dinner in the kitchen. I was crying and shouting about what just happened but she didn't look at me or say anything. She wasn't shocked. It was like she knew what he was going to do. We were like a normal family in many ways. I went to school, went on holidays, I went out with friends, just bad things would happen at home that nobody else knew about. I think the worst things happened before I hit puberty. As a teenager it got better but we really got on. I would barely speak to him and he used to get really angry that I was ignoring him, but there wasn't any more physical violence. I remember when I was 15 maybe, we were arguing in the living room and he came charging towards me. It was the first time I stood up to him. I charged back at him with my fists raised. I was so angry and I thought I could take him. He backed off straight away. He looked like he was hugging himself as he ran off. From what I remember he didn't try to hit me again after that. I don't know if this is true but I was doubled up with stomach pain one night. My dad told me my mom tried to poison me. He brought it up in a few arguments. My mom was a sweet woman. I can't imagine her wanting to kill me off her own accord. I think my dad persuaded her to poison me. I left home at 18 when I went to university. I don't understand why I didn't leave sooner. I know I was scared of how I would cope in the big wide world and that's what stopped me leaving. I felt broken like I wouldn't be able to support myself. I moved into a house with my best friend and 6 others. I remember thinking it was so weird how nobody shouts at each other. I'm not in contact with my parents. My dad died a few years ago from brain cancer. I barely spoke to him before he died. I don't speak to my mom. She denies anything ever happened, that he never hit me and we just had some bad arguments sometimes. I don't feel like I could have anything to do with her until she acknowledges how things were when I was young. I think she is scared of the truth coming out. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos like this. Feel free to share your own stories about psychopaths and sociopaths in the comments section.